The knife is a Spyderco Paramilitary 2 in CPM M4. It's still one of the models that I would consider to be a top model for the Paramilitary 2. Between the steel and the execution, I think that this one is top shelf. I take care of this model. I carry it and I use it, but I take care of it. It came around to be sharpened again. I had taken it out of the box to carry it again, and I had noticed corrosion on the edge bevel. So if I see that, it's time to sharpen the knife. Put a new edge on it, something clean, move on from there. In doing this sharpening, I wanted to try a finer edge on M4 and see how that did. I wasn't so much concerned with a mirror polish, but just a finer edge. I've noticed lately with crew wear, carrying crew wear with a polished edge, the edge retention is shocking. I really need to put it to a test, but it just seems to keep going, and if it does back off at all, stropping it simply brings it back. There are some similarities between crew wear and M4, and I wanted to see how M4's reaction would be. To do that, I decided to use the Veneve diamond waterstones for the sharpening, at least to start with them. I've been using the Veneve stones quite a bit and really enjoying them. They do a really good job, and the Veneve stones are, I mean, what I've got is this small version, but it's something that I'm planning to invest more money in. So I wanted to play around with the edge a little bit. Started with the Veneve on the 400, took the old edge off, took the old steel off, and brought new steel out to the surface, creating a burr. After the 400, I moved on to the 800. I made my way through the 800 grit stone, and then moved on to the 1200 grit Veneve. The Veneve stones, they really sharpen well, and they really do good with M4. They slow down a little bit on stuff like S110V and K390, but on a steel like M4, it's really no problem. After the 1200 grit, I moved on to the 2000 grit. Worked my way through that, and I was really going through each stone twice. I really wanted to remove the old scratch pattern left by diamond plates that was on the knife and really establish something new on the edge. After the Veneve stones, I worked with a 6000 grit Naniwa diamond waterstone. That 6000 grit Naniwa can be temperamental. It can be, as a stone, it can be problematic. With certain steels, I don't prefer using it. But I've had good luck in the past with M4. K390, S110V, with those steels, I haven't had the best of luck with the Naniwa. But M4, in my mind, categorizing it as a steel, there's quite a difference there. So I went ahead and threw it into the mix here. The problems that I've had with it, with those other steels, is it taking the bite off the edge, or seeming to. Either that or I'm making a mistake. Didn't have that problem with this knife. I didn't spend an extreme amount of time on it. I didn't go through it twice, but I did it just enough to bring the sharpness up. After that, I moved on to the Spyderco Ultrafine ceramic stone. I worked with that as a finishing stone. The Naniwa stone lacks in feedback, whereas the Spyderco Ultrafine gives an extreme amount of feedback. Really a great stone for finishing. Really brings the sharpness up. After the Spyderco Ultrafine, it was time to move on to strops. And I didn't want to start heavy with the strops. I wanted to start with a 1 micron. On a whim, I decided to try something that I hadn't tried before. Starting with 1 micron on basswood. I took a piece of basswood and one side I left the way that it was, which is my normal procedure. But the other side I sanded, starting with 15, I think it was 1500 grit. I know that I finished with 2000 grit. It was a very big difference in the finish on the wood. I mean, you could see it, you could feel it with your finger. I applied 1 micron diamond spray to both sides and let it dry, and then started with the untouched side. Used that for burr removal. Started in on it, removed most of the burr, found a few spots on the knife that did still have burr, and then went back to the ultrafine stone. Very light movements, just to deburr, just to weaken it. The stone is going to hit it harder than the strop is. After weakening the burr a little bit, I went back to the strop, same side of the strop, and I worked with it more to finish removing the burr. When the burr was fully removed, I moved on to the sanded side of the wooden strop, and I used that. I can't say definitively if it made a huge difference on the edge, but it was interesting. It certainly made a difference in the wood, and I think I could probably feel a difference in the knife. So that's something that I'll be experimenting with more. After the wooden strop at 1 micron, I moved on to 1 micron leather strop. Working with that, I have a series of new leather strops that I've been working with, doing some experimenting with leather, different kinds of leather, different kinds of compound, and resurfacing certain leathers before using them with certain compounds. I've been a little bit busy, and I've drawn some conclusions on what I think works well and what was a waste of time. After the 1 micron leather strop, I moved on to a 1/2 micron and then 1/4 micron. After that, I moved on to a 1/10 of a micron, then a 0.05 micron, 0.025 micron, and finished with a 0.005 micron strop. It's 3.2 million grit strop. I wasn't going for a mirror polished edge here. I was going for, I wasn't shooting for the polish of the bevel, I was shooting for the edge, a fine edge, and I figured why not push the limits, taking it as far as I did on the strops, but I didn't really care about the polish. The polish happened to come up, but it wasn't something that I was set out to do. The other thing that came up was the sharpness of the edge. Came up very much so. I can feel a difference thumbing the edge between 1 micron and then getting into the extremes on the strops where you're dropping down below 1/10 of a micron. There's a difference in the way that the knife will whittle hair, and there's a difference in how the edge feels. So I'm interested to see how the edge will wear down and what difference that'll make. M4 is an interesting steel. I prefer it as a knife user for its edge holding and its stability. I prefer it as a sharpener for the way it'll take an edge. It's got an interesting combination of carbide formers in the steel. And the fact that it's usually brought to a high hardness, around low 60s. Low 60s is pretty hard. The Rockwell scale isn't a linear scale. The difference between 58 and 59 is not the same as the difference between 61 and 62. As the scale moves farther down, it gets more extreme. So, low 60s on the Rockwell, that's pretty hard. comparing M4 to a steel like S30V, I mean, just in general discussion about it in the knife community, there's a huge difference between the two. But I mean, if you look at the composition of the two steels, there are some similarities, similar amounts of carbon, similar amounts of vanadium. Those are two big ones. Those are two big elements. Now, there's some other things that are different. The chromium content in the two steels is very different. S30V has 10% more chromium, bringing it up to 14% chromium, which is the low limit for a steel to be considered stainless. M4 is 4%. M4 has a lot of tungsten and a lot of molybdenum in it, both carbide formers. The elements do other things in the steel as well. I mean, tungsten causes a secondary hardening response during heat treat with M4. It's pretty important to the performance of the steel. But you're still going to get tungsten carbide. You're still going to get some molybdenum carbide. Everybody talks about carbide, and everybody always talks about vanadium carbide, really hardest carbide, and it is. And when you hear about tungsten, you hear people say it's really hard, almost as hard as vanadium, and that's true. You don't ever hear much about molybdenum carbide. Interesting thing though, molybdenum carbide is the same hardness as tungsten carbide. Just throwing it out there. At any rate, the model is a really good model, and I really enjoy it. And I really like M4 as a steel. And I just thought that, being that I needed to sharpen this anyway, it might be interesting just to highlight it, taking a different approach to it, using the diamond waterstones, and, you know, after the fact, looking to see if I could get a different performance out of the steel.